Hi, I'm Dan Kubisky with the Society of Professional Journalists International Community. Last week, it was revealed that the Hong Kong Inland Revenue Department, the tax office, has been auditing at least six independent news organizations, people affiliated with those news outlets, and their families. Now, this information became known thanks to the Hong Kong Journalist Association, which itself is under investigation. With me now is the president of the HKJA, Selena Chang. Selena, thank you very much for taking time to be with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so first, let's just could you just give us a brief summary of what you discovered and why these audits appear to be out of the ordinary?
Yeah, it started around late 2023 when Hong Kong JA itself, as a trade union, received notification from the government's tax authority about auditing taxes about 6 to 7 years prior. So that would be around 2017. And at that time, we received letters from the government saying that we hadn't filed our tax returns, and they considered that our income from previous years were profits that we made from business or trade, and said we are to pay profits taxes. So that happened, and we had to respond to their inquiries. We had some meetings, some back and forth. And then over the course of the next 1 year or so, we realized that there were more organizations audited for their taxes, and that includes Hong Kong Free Press, one of the city's largest English language media organizations, and In Media, which is another relatively medium-sized independent news outlet, I'd say. And it was until March this year that many more journalists, independent freelancers, as well as small independent news outlets were audited for taxes. And we previously had support groups for journalists and small news outlets due to a wave of harassment and trolling that were received around 6 months earlier. And it was through this support group that we realized that some overlaps of people and organization now facing tax audits. So the HKJA supported them by roping them in with professional advisors. Because, for example, if you're a freelancer, you don't already have an accountant or an auditor. And so naturally, people were quite worried about what the next steps could be and what they would have to submit to the authorities. So the funny thing with tax audits in Hong Kong, and certainly in other places of British tradition, I'd say, they would usually have to prepay an amount of tax that's projected for the next year. That is quite common for all taxpayers. But what is unusual in this case is that the government told these organizations and journalists that they are now audited for their taxes from 6 years ago,
Mm.
and they are to prepay a withholding amount based on an assessment of their income that is got no basis in fact or formula that is projected on that particular year in the past, and they would have to pay it up front before an audit or an investigation even completed or started. And so, of course, that's led to some concern about financial stresses, especially for individuals, but also for small news organizations. In our union with HKJA, we sort of started this process earlier, back in late 2023, and some of the people are facing it just facing the beginning right now. So we were in a position to share our experience with them, let them know, how it's like to deal with tax authorities, what you need to do with your auditor, what you might need to consider if you need to hire a tax lawyer, which, by the way, is very hard to hire a tax lawyer who's willing to work on it pro bono or at a charity rate. So that's when we realized that the tax authority was really sort of widening the scope of these audits on media and journalists. And making assessments that are not grounded in anything and requiring these people to pay upfront, basically. And during that process, we realized that some people were given totally erroneous information. For example, individuals were asked to pay profits tax on an entity that they did not own. They were given a business registration number that does not exist. Other people who were asked to pay profits tax on entities for years before these entities were even created, way earlier. People's spouses were audited even though they were not filing their tax returns in combination. My own parents were audited. So these all seem very unusual to us. And so we decided to sort of take action collectively. It is true that in Hong Kong, because of a downturn in the economy in the city, but also with mainland China, the government has not been able to earn as much as they did from land premium and land sales. That used to be the biggest chunk of income for Hong Kong. And so instead, they are trying to tax citizens, ordinary citizens more, conducting more tax audits on companies and groups to get more revenue. I think that's all normal and understandable. But the fact that, as the authorities seems to increase the number of audits generally, in the media circle, they seem to be targeting a very small group of people who are all in small independent media outlets. So that was very concerning for us because it seemed like there is a trend, there has been a trend that the authorities were targeting journalists or media outlets using financial or commercial regulatory means.
Now
And
oh, sorry.
so that's, we believe, is an ongoing trend. And there were several incidents earlier that we think attest to it.
You mentioned that a lot of the targets are also freelance journalists.
Yes.
Uh, it, were they also targeting, let's say, full-time employees of news organizations, or was it the news organizations and then also many of the freelancers? Uh,
Right. So from what we know, of all the cases in the city right now, there are at least 6 news outlets, and then plus Hong Kong JA as a union, and then another company which is linked to one of the people audited in those organizations. But that company is not in not in the media business, it's not in this field, it's just linked by virtue of the people. More than half of the individuals audited are founders of these small news outlets, or former directors. So people who may have founded the company but then left since then. 2 of those are freelance independent contractors for international news outlets, for foreign media, which are international in scale. And 2 others, they are 2 other individuals. They are basically citizen journalists who have gone on to become more established, have their own platforms and their own companies. So that's approximately the scale.
okay.
And only one of the people is a sort of ordinary employee of one of the small outlets. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I wasn't clear on the breakdown, and thank you very much. That was a very good breakdown of who's being impacted by this. Now, the government has reacted uh, to this information by saying it does not focus and has not focused any audits based on an industry or the background of the subjects, but yet we're seeing this, 6 independent news organizations,
Mm.
dozens of journalists, people who are tied to it, and even a company that's not a media outlet, but because somebody was tied to that company and a media outlet, that company now gets audited. This seems a bit odd. I mean, what's your reaction to the government's response to this?
Yeah, the government actually responded to it in at least two instances. The head of the tax authority, the tax commissioner, who said that the background of the companies or individuals audited were irrelevant. I guess he or the authority didn't say directly that it was not the reason they were audited. He simply said that it wasn't relevant. And in fact, in the protocols for the city's tax audits, it's written in the protocol that they are allowed to target a specific industry. So, for example, if there was an industry that's more cash intensive, sort of having the notoriety to be likely to evade taxes, the authorities are allowed to do so. But they did not invoke this one on the media industry. They simply said that the industry or the background are not relevant. Of course, we didn't think so. If it was totally irrelevant, well, I guess what we think is maybe they were not targeting the media industry per se, but a specific corner of the media industry. And for this corner to have such high coverage or likelihood of being audited, now we know, uh, seems probability seems probabilistically unlikely, uh, or highly improbable. I would just say highly improbable, um, unless uh, unless the general number of audits have skyrocketed. I don't think it would be likely that just a particular segment of this industry is facing audits right now.
Yeah.
So I think it's very hard to convince anyone with reason that this had nothing to do with the industry or this segment of the industry. The sort of second response that the government gave was actually from the city's leader, the chief executive. He used to be a police officer and the head of the security arm. And he basically said, when asked about this issue, he basically said nobody should be having any privilege to not be audited, and anyone who evades taxes should not be doing so, and that industry organizations should not be supporting anyone who's evading or not paying their taxes. So I think this kind of comment sort of shows quite clearly, the perspective of a security expert running the city, commenting on financial regulatory matters. First of all, the tax authority already said very clearly, also according to their protocol, that anyone audited or now asked to pay upfront on the withholding tax amount are, they're doing so per protocol. Doesn't mean that anyone was skirting taxes. They're just checking. But in the eyes of a former security official, that sort of being audited amounts to evading taxes.
Yeah.
So that sends a very strong message to all the other firms that are now under audit, not just in the media industry. Uh, Bloomberg published a story the day after our press conference saying that there is a surge in number of firms in venture capital. And I think in venture capital and other asset management circles, they were also seeing an increase in number of audits. So it would be very hard to tell these people in finance, that now that you're audited, you're also for sure skirting taxes. So so that's sort of the government response on
Okay.
this issue. They
Uh,
refuse to they refuse to say that they're targeting the media industry, but at the same time, sort of label people who are under audit as criminals, essentially. Um, and that kind of proves our point that the government is undertaking audits and charging people for amounts they didn't owe based on assessments that we believe were false.
right.
So, um, in the matter of taxes, you basically have to prove you're not guilty yourself.
That you didn't make
Uh,
all this money that they're saying you made.
yeah, but still you have to prove it first.
Right, exactly.
You have to pay first, prove it, and then hopefully get a refund on that sum, right?
Now, you had mentioned, you're talking
So yeah.
about the investigation appears to be in a corner of the media industry in Hong Kong. In, in the information that you've been able to obtain, have any of the pro-Beijing media outlets, are they facing similar audits?
Not that we know of. I think if that is happening, I would be very surprised. I do think we have ears to the ground. If it was happening to other pro-Beijing outlets or other outlets on the spectrum, lifestyle magazines, CEO magazines, fashion magazines, I think we would know it. Um, but as far as we know of, no, it's just these
It's
small
just these
independent
independent
outlets.
organizations.
Yeah.
Now, I lived in Hong Kong a quarter of a century ago. And had there been anything like this at that time, there would have been massive demonstrations and there would have been a large outcry. But now you have a whole series of security laws that make actions and peaceful actions against the government and criticism of the government very difficult. How is what you've revealed, how is that playing in Hong Kong at this point? How are people reacting? How are other organizations reacting?
Yeah, so basically there are other civil society groups, people who are, for example, other political activists who are still around. They came forth to say that they too were audited for taxes after HKJA came out to talk about it for journalists. So that's the atmosphere in the city, right? Like people are not allowed to say as much as they used to. I wouldn't say there's no more freedom of speech. I think there still is a degree of press freedom and freedom of speech in the city, but basically everybody had to tread carefully on eggshells and people second guess themselves all the time. So in this atmosphere, if you're audited for taxes, a lot of the individuals wouldn't even say it out loud. And some of the reporters previously, they thought they were selected randomly or they were scared about it. They thought probably something was happening to them. They might have been targeted, but they wouldn't share it with others. So it really took some time even for us as a union to get people to talk to each other that they're facing the same issue and that they could seek support from each other and from others outside of their circle. Um, so yeah, I think much like for our work in the discussion on press freedom, like not only is press freedom reduced, it's also become somewhat a taboo to discuss this out loud. And this is what HKJ is trying to do still. We have to sort of push against the grain to be able to do it. Um, but yeah, so not only are people restricted from those acts, exercising those rights, the discussion of that exercise is also become a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so that's the general landscape that we have in Hong Kong.
Okay. Yeah. On another issue, away from this tax issue, you had told me that you're standing for re-election in the HKJA, and elections are next month, I think you said.
This month in June,
This
yes.
month, okay. You're right. It's early June. I'm still thinking May. Uh, when you were elected the first time, you were employed by the Wall Street Journal, and they told you not to stand for election. You continued. You did run. You were elected, and you were fired. Uh, you filed a lawsuit. I don't know what you can talk about that, but is there anything you can tell us about the progress of your suit or kind of the atmosphere that's around this now?
Yeah, for sure. So this happened, the journal dismissed me back in July last year, so it's been almost a year. I filed with the Hong Kong Labor Department for a criminal complaint because the specific law that they violated to prevent, deter, or to lay off somebody over their union role is a criminal act in the city. And there was a statutory period of 6 months for the government to press charges. Uh, we saw that they didn't press charges, so I pressed charges as a private citizen. So it's a process called private prosecution. I don't know if it exists in the US. I believe it's sort of a very Roman British tradition. Basically, if somebody violates the law and you're party of that, you're either a victim or you're party of that, a private citizen is allowed to press charges against another person or entity for criminal behavior. So that's basically what I'm doing. Not the government is enforcing the law. I am enforcing the law through the court system in Hong Kong. It's been dragging on. The government is taking some time to consider whether they would like to intervene. Intervene could have two outcomes. They could take over the proceedings and press charges themselves, or they could take over the proceedings and toss it out and not allow this to go ahead. So they had asked for an extension of time of a couple of months, and the next court hearing will be in early July, and we will know more what will happen then. And I believe whatever the outcome is will be quite revelatory on what the government's position is regarding the rights to run, lead, and be a part of a union in Hong Kong.
Okay. All right. Well, good luck to you on the case. I know the SPJ, among other journalism organizations, have stood behind you in your struggles. I want to thank you very much for taking so much time to be with us. Do you have any final thoughts or comments you'd like to make about the situation in Hong Kong, whether it's related specifically to the tax audits or something else that we didn't even touch on?
Yeah. I think the situation in Hong Kong has stabilized, even though there are undercurrents. I think for our peers in other countries, especially in the US, undergoing some big changes lately, I think Hong Kong is an interesting example of what could happen when the city's government sort of takes a turn, takes a pivot into restricting certain rights. So what's happening is sort of we had a very dramatic opening to this period in time for Hong Kong's history when the national security law descended and then people were arrested, put in jail, not allowed to speak or report on what they used to do. And now, after a couple of years, it seems like the government is switching their strategies to use tools or laws that don't explicitly relate to content or speech and use these to prosecute people instead. So, so I think it would be interesting for our peers abroad to sort of take note of these cases or these incidents and be very cautious as to be cautious as to saying like whether this incident or this prosecution or this kind of action by the authorities on a certain group is or isn't related to speech or to their right to exercise a basic right. For example, if a group like us or a media is audited for taxes, of course, it reflects poorly on that group's integrity, their reputation, and there may be people who feel like, we can't comment on it because it doesn't really affect their ability to operate, to exercise their speech or right to report. I don't think that's true. I think the sort of soil for or the economic environment, the business environment for news outlets and journalists to operate safely and sustainably is just as important as the political environment, the physical safety that they rely on. So yeah, I think that's an interesting point that we're observing and experiencing now that our peers can take note from elsewhere as well.
Okay, well, we will be keeping our eyes on it here, at least in the SPJ international community, partially because having lived in Hong Kong, I have a great love for the place and a great love for the trying to protect the freedoms and civil liberties that the people were promised. Um, Selena Cheng, the president of the Hong Kong Journalists Association, thank you very much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me and great to chat with you.